Sit down." The order tore through the courtroom like a gunshot. Papers flew from the benches. A woman yelped as the crowd lurched. The protesters' chants, half swallowed by the marble acoustics, tangled with the echo of boots striking tile. Officer Daniel Mercer moved before thought could catch up with him. Training, habit, heat. A motion meant to restore order, to make noise obey, then silence. The air collapsed inward, thick as plaster dust after an explosion. People froze in their seats. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, indifferent and white. Mercer stood still, hand hovering uselessly in the air, realizing that the movement which had felt like discipline now felt like exposure. Cameras lifted like weapons. The mechanical clicks were immediate, pitiless, for an instant. The courtroom looked less like a civic chamber and more like a staged confession. Every witness, every lens recording the same truth from a different angle. The judge was still on the bench, gavel raised but unmoving. The clerk's mouth hung open, a half-formed objection dying on her lips. Someone at the back muttered, "Did that just happen?" and then regretted speaking. Mercer's boot left a faint smudge of dust on the polished floor. He saw it and couldn't stop staring at it. All the discipline he had ever learned, parade ground posture, perfect shine, the ritual of respectability, condensed into that mark, across the aisle. A woman was straightening herself, calm, deliberate. She brushed her sleeve, gathered her papers, and stood upright. Her face was composed, her eyes fixed somewhere beyond him. Toward the bench, toward justice itself, perhaps. "Officer," the judge began, voice unsteady. "Control yourself." But control was gone. Control had fled the room the moment noise turned to witness. Mercer tried to speak. He started, but the sentence found no ending. The woman's silence answered for her. It wasn't defiance. It was a mirror. Outside the courthouse, city traffic droned, a distant, indifferent world still moving forward. Inside, every second dragged. The fluorescent tubes flickered once, then steadied, as if the building itself exhaled. Reporters had already pulled out their phones. The low whir of recording apps, the red dots of cameras blinking to life, filled the vacuum where voices had been. "Ma'am, are you all right?" someone whispered. She nodded once, then faced the bench.
"Your Honor, may I address the court?"
Her tone was even, professional, stripped of emotion. The words landed harder than any shout. The judge cleared his throat, unable to meet her gaze. "Perhaps we should adjourn for a moment." Chairs scraped. Uniforms shifted awkwardly. A bailiff signaled toward Mercer, a subtle gesture that meant stand down, stay silent. He obeyed, though the command came too late to matter. As the woman gathered her folder from the floor, a few papers remained scattered, a photograph, a typed statement, a legal brief. Mercer bent instinctively to help but stopped halfway down. The air between them felt charged, radioactive. She collected the last page herself, slid it into the folder, and rose without a word. The crowd parted for her. Even those who didn't understand what they had just witnessed felt the moral gravity of it. She passed through them without touching anyone, her steps measured, unhurried. When she reached the doors, she turned briefly, not toward Mercer, but toward the bench. "I'll be filing a report," she said quietly. Then she left. The doors swung shut behind her with a hydraulic sigh. The echo of that sound filled every corner of the chamber. Mercer exhaled for the first time in what felt like minutes. His pulse thudded in his throat. The other officers avoided his eyes. Somewhere a phone beeped. Recording stopped. "The file saved. Officer Mercer," the presiding judge said at last. "You are relieved of duty for the remainder of these proceedings." The words were formal, but the tone was disbelief. Mercer nodded once. The motion felt mechanical. He looked again at the dull scuff mark on the floor, the place where his authority had collided with something immovable. He wiped at it with his shoe, but the residue spread instead of fading. When he finally lifted his eyes, he saw the gallery watching him, some with anger, some with fascination, most with quiet satisfaction that order could finally be questioned. He turned toward the exit. Each step sounded louder than the last. The hum of the lights followed him down the corridor, an electric reminder that the system never truly sleeps. Outside, the courthouse steps were already filling with people holding phones aloft, screens glowing with replayed seconds. He could hear his own voice, "Sit down," echoing tinny through someone's speaker. The words sounded foreign now, detached from any authority. A gust of autumn air hit his face as he pushed through the doors. For a heartbeat, he imagined the city swallowing the moment, forgetting it. But he knew better. The footage would live longer than memory. It would define him before he could defend himself. He looked down again at his boots, polished that morning until they mirrored the ceiling lights. Now, in the gray daylight, they reflected only concrete and shame. Behind him, through the glass doors, the courtroom remained lit, fluorescent, sterile, eternal. Inside that light, the law waited to decide what it had seen. Mercer adjusted his belt, squared his shoulders, and walked down the steps into the noise of the street. Cameras followed, their lenses glinting like judgment. Each click was a sentence already written, the echo of his own command, "Sit down," lingered in his head, but now it sounded like something else entirely. Not authority, but fear disguised as order. And somewhere beyond the crowd, in a city that pretended to move on, the silence after that echo was still spreading, cold, clinical, absolute. The first upload hit the local news server before noon. By afternoon, it was everywhere, cropped, looped, slowed down, captioned. No one knew who had filmed it first. The clip existed in too many hands at once, as if the building itself had recorded the event and released it in self-defense. Every screen carried the same frame, a courtroom under white light. A command barked, a movement, then a pause. The footage cut to black just before anyone understood what they had seen. The blankness afterward was part of its power. In the precinct, the televisions ran on mute. Only the blue light shifted across the walls, replaying the same flicker over the faces of the officers who pretended not to watch. The coffee machine hissed louder than usual. Phones buzzed on desks, ignored but not silenced. Officer Daniel Mercer sat in the commander's office, the blinds half closed. The air conditioning hummed like a reprimand. Across from him, Captain Lowe held a printed statement in one hand and a styrofoam cup in the other. The coffee had gone cold, but he drank it anyway. "They're calling it an assault," Lowe said flatly. Mercer nodded once. His eyes stayed on the desk. Clean, polished wood, a single scratch near the edge. "The chief wants a full internal review." Lowe continued. "Effective immediately, you're on administrative leave. With pay for now." Silence. Outside the office, someone laughed, a short, nervous bark quickly strangled into coughs. Mercer finally spoke. "You saw the video?" Lowe exhaled. Everyone's seen the video. He dropped the paper onto the desk between them. The header read, "Press Statement Draft A." The first line, "The department is aware of an incident that occurred inside the county courthouse." "The matter is under review," Mercer read it twice. The words felt like camouflage, formal, bloodless, designed to cover everything and reveal nothing. "Public relations is working overtime," Lowe said. "They want context, procedure, anything that makes it sound like control." Mercer looked up. "Context," he repeated. Lowe shrugged. "They'll say the crowd was disruptive. That you were following orders. That the clip doesn't show the full sequence. And do you believe that?" Lowe didn't answer. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, eyes heavy with bureaucratic fatigue. "Belief isn't the point. Optics are." The office phone rang. He ignored it. Through the blinds, Mercer could see the corridor. Officers passing, glancing, averting eyes. Their movements looked choreographed. Quick smiles, whispered sentences, hands folded over uncertainty. In the break room, someone had muted the television but left the captions running. "Officer under investigation. Use of force in courthouse. Department pledges transparency." The words crawled across the screen in endless rotation, like an incantation meant to calm the public. A younger officer leaned against the doorway. "They'll forget in a week," he said quietly, as if offering comfort. "News moves fast." Mercer said nothing. He had thought the same once. By evening, the official statement went live. The department's social media account posted a single paragraph. Measured, neutral, wrapped in phrases like procedural integrity and commitment to community trust. Comments poured in faster than they could be deleted. Screenshots spread faster still. At headquarters, the Public Information Office glowed in the dark. The only sound was the soft tapping of keys. The spokesperson, a woman with tired eyes and perfect diction, edited the release again, replacing incident with encounter, complaint with concern, language as containment. On the opposite wall, muted monitors replayed the clip in endless loop. The room's fluorescent hum matched the rhythm of the frames. Command, movement, silence. Each repetition flattened emotion until it became pure data. Back at home, Mercer sat in the dark, the light of his laptop illuminating the badge on the table beside him. Notifications blinked across the screen. News links, opinion posts, an email from the union promising support. Support meant silence, non-statements, procedural delay. He clicked one of the videos. The audio was harsh, compressed, his own voice warped by echo. "Sit down." The words filled the small room, then ended in static. He watched again, waiting for something different to happen, for the moment to rewrite itself. It never did. A knock at the door broke the loop. It was his partner, Officer Reed, standing in the hallway with 2 takeout coffees. "Thought you could use this," Reed said. His voice carried the awkward sympathy of someone balancing loyalty and doubt. Mercer stepped aside. The apartment smelled of metal polish and stale air. "They're saying Internal Affairs will start interviews tomorrow," Reed said. Mercer nodded. "Let them. You should stay offline." Mercer almost laughed. A little late for that, they stood in silence, the television flickering behind them. On the screen, the courtroom scene replayed without sound. To an outsider, it could have been anything. An argument, a stumble, a misunderstanding. To those who knew the setting, it was unmistakable, the law turning on itself. Reed glanced at the badge on the table. "They'll make you the example," he said. Mercer's reply was quiet. "Maybe that's what I deserve." Reed looked away, uncomfortable. "I didn't say that." "I know," Mercer said. "That's why it matters." When Reed left, Mercer turned off the television, but the image remained, etched on the inside of his eyelids. The silence afterward felt heavier than the noise. At the station, night shift had begun. In the lobby, the television still played the same footage on mute. The janitor paused his mop to watch, shaking his head slowly before moving on. The glow of the screen followed him down the corridor, reflecting in the polished floors like a warning light that wouldn't shut off. Upstairs, the public relations director sent one last email. "We must control the narrative." He didn't specify whose narrative he meant. By midnight, the city outside had gone quiet. But inside every dark office, the same blue light kept flickering, screens looping, eyes watching, words rewritten. The video played again and again, each time shorter, cleaner, more detached, until it no longer looked like violence at all, but policy in motion. 2 weeks later, the station smelled of polish and staged optimism. The walls had been wiped clean, the brass plaques dusted, the atrium's glass buffed to a sterile transparency. The staff had been instructed to maintain professional decorum. Everyone knew what that meant. Act normal, look attentive, speak only when spoken to. The mayor's motorcade arrived precisely at 9. The city seal gleamed on the black sedan's door. Photographers clustered outside the entrance, murmuring rehearsed introductions. The department had gathered in the lobby, a formation of blue and gray beneath fluorescent light that buzzed just loud enough to register as tension. Officer Daniel Mercer stood in the second row. His uniform still fit, though it felt heavier now, as if stitched with something invisible. He had not been reinstated, only asked to appear. Optics, a display of inclusion, repentance, continuity. Captain Lowe adjusted his tie. "Remember," he whispered, "this is about moving forward." Mercer nodded. Forward was a word that sounded harmless, but everyone here knew it meant survival. The double-glass doors opened. The woman stepped through. Chief Amara Holt. Dark suit, precise lines. No visible rank insignia beyond the badge clipped at her waist. Her posture did not waver under the weight of 100 eyes. The mayor followed, smiling for the cameras, saying words about progress, leadership, transparency. The usual vocabulary of public healing. But no one was listening to him. The sound of her heels against the marble floor carried farther than his speech. Mercer felt the rhythm in his chest, measured, deliberate, unforgiving. He tried not to move. The room rearranged itself around her presence. Secretaries straightened, lieutenants squared their shoulders. Even the air conditioning seemed to quiet for a second, as if waiting for instruction. When she reached the center of the lobby, the mayor gestured toward the assembled officers. "Your new chief of police, Amara Holt," he announced. "A leader for a new era." Applause broke out. Polite, hesitant, Holt's gaze moved slowly across the faces before her. She gave a small nod, enough to acknowledge but not invite. The applause faded before it was finished. Mercer's throat tightened. He thought she might look past him, that her eyes might skip his row entirely. But they didn't. For half a second her gaze met his. Not accusatory, not forgiving, just recognition, cold, exact, permanent. Then she looked away. The mayor continued speaking, promising structural review and cultural renewal. Each phrase landed like dust on polished surfaces, decorative and quickly forgotten. Holt stood motionless beside him, hands clasped loosely in front of her. Her stillness had authority. It made movement seem like weakness. When the mayor finished, she stepped forward to the podium. She didn't need to adjust the microphone. Her voice was low and clear. "I'm not here to rebuild," she said. "I'm here to remind." No one breathed. "This department was built on the idea of service," she continued. "But service without reflection becomes power, and power without reflection becomes decay. We will not decay." Her words were slow, deliberate, each syllable a weight placed exactly where it belonged. She didn't mention the courthouse. She didn't have to. The memory was in the room's air, in the way every officer avoided looking directly at her, in the way Mercer's shoulders locked rigidly against his will. "Accountability is not a press statement," she said. "It's a culture." The mayor smiled, unsure whether to applaud again. Holt gave him nothing to read. When she stepped back from the podium, the ceremony seemed to lose its script. The mayor gestured awkwardly toward the elevators. "Chief Holt will begin touring the facilities," he said, half to her, half to the crowd. She nodded once, then turned toward the security gates. Each officer, one by one, scanned their ID badges to follow. The machine's beeps formed an odd rhythm, compliance set to electronic tone. When Holt approached the scanner, the guard stepped aside automatically, hand hovering near the console. She placed her badge against the glass. Beep. Access granted. The sound was small, but it carried through the atrium. Mercer felt it like punctuation, the official rewriting of order. As the group dispersed, conversations restarted in fragments. "She's calm," someone murmured. "Too calm," another answered. "Mayor needed a symbol," someone else said quietly. He got one. Holt walked through the hallway without hurry. The air conditioning hummed overhead, steady and cold. The glass walls reflected her silhouette again and again, an unbroken procession of the same composed figure, walking into the building that had once defined her absence. In the conference room upstairs, the department's senior staff gathered. Mercer was not among them. He watched from the corridor through the thin pane of glass, a spectator to his own displacement. Inside, Holt stood at the head of the table. She didn't sit. The others did. "You've read the reports," she said. "You've seen the footage. You know the damage," no one replied. A few nodded faintly, as if gesture could substitute for language. "Reform will not begin with policy," Holt continued. "It will begin with posture. The way you walk into a room, the way you speak a name, the way you use silence." Her gaze moved over the room. It paused on Captain Lowe, then shifted to the departmental council. "Silence," she said again, "can be duty, or it can be fear. Learn the difference." Lowe swallowed hard. "Yes, Chief." The meeting continued in the language of procedure. Review committees, oversight panels, training reforms, but beneath every word was the pulse of her presence, an unspoken reminder that authority had changed hands. Mercer watched until the door closed, sealing off the room. He turned back toward the lobby. The glass reflected him now, small against the wide atrium. At the security desk, a monitor played silent footage of the morning ceremony for the department's internal feed. Holt appeared again and again, entering, standing, speaking. The image looped like a screensaver for a system trying to remind itself it could evolve. Mercer adjusted his cap and walked out into the sunlight. The day was bright but cold. The city's reflection shimmered in the atrium glass behind him, bending around the shape of the new chief. From inside, she watched him go, expression unreadable. The automatic doors closed between them, their soft pneumatic hiss louder than any farewell. And above the station's glass walls, the flag moved slightly in the wind, its motion slow, almost cautious, as if unsure which way to face. The briefing room was colder than usual. Someone had turned the air conditioning too high, or maybe it only felt that way because no one dared move. Rows of metal chairs lined the floor, each one identical, each holding a printed agenda. Department orientation, Chief A. Holt. The paper was crisp, uncreased, smelling faintly of toner and expectation. At the front, the projector hummed softly. A single white rectangle of light stretched across the far wall, cutting through the air like an open wound. Dust particles floated through it, turning slowly, indifferent to the gravity of the moment. The officers filed in quietly, boots echoing against the linoleum. They avoided conversation. Even greetings sounded mechanical, muted acknowledgments between people suddenly unsure how their words might sound. Daniel Mercer stood at the back. His reinstatement hadn't been discussed. He was simply told to attend. No uniform today, just a gray shirt, sleeves rolled tight at the wrist. He looked like part of the department, and apart from it at once. When the clock struck 9, Amara Holt entered. She didn't need to call for attention. The sound of the door closing behind her was enough. She crossed to the podium with calm precision, her heels striking the floor in a rhythm that seemed to measure the silence itself. She paused at the front, hands folded lightly on the podium. "Good morning," she said. The room answered in uneven murmurs. She waited until they stopped. Then she began. "This department is at a threshold," she said. Not of crisis, but of conscience. Her tone carried no emotion, only clarity. It was the voice of someone accustomed to control, not by volume, but by precision. You will hear the word reform many times in the coming months. You'll read it in memos, in statements, in headlines. But understand this: reform is not a performance. It is a reckoning. The words landed softly but sank deep. A slide appeared behind her, the department's emblem projected in sterile white light. Around it 4 words: accountability, integrity, service, dignity. "These are not decorative," she said. "They are instructions." Someone shifted in their chair. The sound was loud in the quiet. She continued. "You have been trained to act, to respond, to command. But very few of you have been trained to listen, to yourselves, to the people you serve, to the silence that follows your actions." The projector light cast her shadow across the rows of faces, long, narrow, unwavering. It reached Mercer where he stood, splitting his face in half, light on one side, shadow on the other. Holt stepped aside from the podium and began to walk slowly down the aisle. Each step deliberate, unhurried, the kind of pace that demanded the room match it. "When you put on the badge," she said, "you are not claiming authority. You are accepting restraint." Her gaze moved from face to face. Some held it, most didn't. "The badge is not armor," she said. "It is a mirror." The sentence hung in the air. No one wrote it down, but everyone would remember it. She stopped near the center of the room. "For too long, this department has confused silence with loyalty. You have mistaken stillness for order. From this moment forward, you will learn the difference." At the back, Mercer felt the weight of every word. Her tone wasn't directed at him, but it contained him. He saw it in the way others occasionally glanced toward him. Not openly, just quick flickers of recognition, as if his presence marked the invisible boundary she was speaking about. Holt turned back to the front. "We will begin a new review process. Every incident report, every use of force statement, every recorded encounter will be examined under an independent board. Transparency is not a threat to this department. It is its survival." A few heads nodded, mostly from the newer recruits. The veterans remained still, eyes forward, practiced neutrality. "You may think this will pass," she said. "You may believe the public will lose interest. They won't, not this time, because the issue is not public perception. It is who we are when no one is watching." The light from the projector flickered slightly, momentarily distorting her face. The image steadied. "This is not a punishment," Holt said finally. "It is an opportunity to prove that we can still deserve the trust we demand." She returned to the podium. For a moment she said nothing. The silence became something alive. Not absence, but insistence. Then quietly, "We can no longer afford the comfort of pretending." No one applauded. It wasn't that kind of speech. She stepped away from the podium and turned off the projector. The sudden darkness startled the room. Without the light, the officers looked at one another, faces now real, unflattened by glare. The moment had shifted from presentation to confrontation. Holt gathered her notes, a small stack of pages clipped neatly together. She didn't look at them once. "This department will either evolve," she said, or it will vanish. Then she left. The door closed softly behind her. But the silence she left remained. A silence that felt less like absence and more like judgment. The officers stayed seated, as if waiting for someone to tell them what to do next. Mercer remained at the back, unmoving. The words had landed somewhere between condemnation and instruction. He stared at the now dark wall where the emblem had been projected. In the dim light, the paper agenda on every chair caught the faint reflection from the corridor outside. Accountability, integrity, reform. 3 words. 4 syllables. A new language the department would have to learn. As the others began to rise, Mercer stayed behind. He reached down, picked up one of the untouched agendas, and folded it in half. The paper creased sharply, a single sound in a room that no longer knew how to breathe. Outside, the hallway lights flickered once, then steadied. Somewhere in the distance, the hum of the air conditioning returned, steady, indifferent, institutional. The system had heard her. It was already adjusting. The interview room had no windows, only a table, 2 chairs, and a single clock that ticked too loudly for the size of the space. Mercer sat on one side, his hands folded, his badge placed neatly beside a glass of water he would not touch. The air smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant, sterile, administrative. Across from him, the investigator arranged her folders with methodical precision. Her nameplate read, L. Garrison, Internal Affairs. She wore no expression, only the faint shadow of fatigue under her eyes. A small red light blinked on the recorder between them. "This is an internal interview with Officer Daniel Mercer," she said. "Conducted on record. Case Mar 427B. Begins 09 hours." She pressed a button. The light steadied. Mercer looked at it the way one looks at a small flame, something that consumes silently. Garrison opened the first folder. "You're aware of the allegations under review?" "Yes," she glanced up. "For the record?" "Yes," he repeated, slower this time. "Use of excessive force during courthouse disturbance." The words fell flat, devoid of context. "Paper language, good," she said. "You understand this interview is administrative, not criminal." "Our goal is factual clarity," Mercer nodded. Though the distinction felt meaningless, Garrison began the sequence of questions, her voice even, rehearsed. "Describe your position that day. Describe the crowd. Describe your perception of threat." He answered mechanically, phrases built from the same vocabulary the department had trained into him. "Procedure, compliance, verbal command, situational control," Garrison wrote in short strokes. The sound of her pen was the only thing that moved in the room. When she paused, Mercer realized the clock was ticking slightly out of rhythm. The second hand hesitated between marks, a small mechanical stutter that made each minute feel incomplete. "Officer Mercer," she said finally, "were you aware that civilian recordings were being taken during the incident?" "Yes." "Did that affect your decision-making?" "No." "Did you feel threatened?" He hesitated. The word feel didn't belong in these rooms. It had no procedural definition. "I felt," he said carefully, "a need to re-establish order." Garrison looked up again. "Define order." Mercer opened his mouth, then stopped. The air conditioner switched on overhead, filling the silence with a low hum. "Order," he said at last, "means people follow direction. And when they don't, then direction becomes enforcement." She wrote something down without looking at him. A long pause followed. The red light blinked again, steady and patient. "Officer Mercer," she said, "has anyone from the department instructed you on how to respond to public inquiries regarding the incident?" "Yes. I was told to refer all questions to the Public Information Office." "Have you done so?" "Yes." Another note. Another pause. She closed the first folder and opened a second, thinner one. Inside was a printed still frame from the video. He didn't need to see it to know which one it was. She slid it halfway across the table. "Is this you?" He nodded. "Do you wish to make a statement about what appears in this image?" He stared at the photograph but didn't touch it. The frozen instant looked nothing like motion, nothing like reality. It looked like evidence of something neither accidental nor intentional, something institutional. "No," he said. "Why not?" "Because whatever I say, it won't change what people have already decided they see." Garrison regarded him for a moment, pen suspended. "Public perception isn't our concern here." He almost laughed. "Isn't it?" The question hung unanswered. She capped her pen, straightened the papers, then uncapped it again, small gestures to control the stillness. Do you believe your actions were consistent with departmental policy at the time? Yes. And now? He looked at her. Policy changes faster than people. She said nothing. The recorder caught the silence in perfect fidelity. Finally, she leaned back slightly. The review is ongoing. You'll receive formal notification once the findings are complete. How long? She shrugged. Weeks, possibly months. It depends. On what? On how much the department wants to remember. The answer wasn't protocol, but she didn't correct herself. She closed the file, turned off the recorder. The red light faded to black. This concludes the interview, she said. Her tone softened just slightly. You can go. Mercer stood, the chair scraping softly against the tile. He hesitated, looking at the untouched glass of water. The surface was perfectly still, unbroken. Do you need anything else from me? He asked. No, she said. Not yet. He nodded, picked up his badge, and left the room. The corridor outside felt colder. The light there was too bright, the kind that made everything look temporary. Officers passed without acknowledgement, each pair of eyes a mirror reflecting uncertainty. He walked toward the exit, the sound of the clock still ticking behind him, slower now, almost deliberate. At the end of the hall, he stopped at a bulletin board covered in memos. One headline caught his eye: Internal Affairs, Accountability in Action. Beneath it, a photograph of smiling officers shaking hands at a conference. He stared at it for a long time. The colors looked wrong, oversaturated, like an advertisement for a system that no longer believed its own language. He stepped outside into the late afternoon air. The sky was a muted gray, the same color as the station's concrete walls. Traffic murmured somewhere beyond the parking lot. Indifferent. Behind him, through the small square window in the door, he could see the interview room again, the glass of water, the empty chair, the clock still ticking toward something unnamed. The institution was still working, still recording, still hesitating, and for the first time, Mercer felt what the silence inside those rooms really meant. It wasn't protection anymore. It was doubt. The hallway was long and white, lit by a series of recessed fixtures that hummed faintly, like an unending exhale. Mercer walked slowly, hands in his pockets, his reflection moving beside him in the glass wall to his right. It looked cleaner than he felt, the crisp lines of his shirt, the straightness of his posture. The reflection was still a version of order, even if he no longer believed in it. The building was quieter than usual. Most of the department had been sent to a community outreach briefing downtown. Only a few officers remained behind, their voices muffled by closed doors. Somewhere a printer whirred, spitting out copies of policy revisions no one would read closely. He turned the corner and nearly stopped. Amara Holt stood at the far end of the corridor. She was looking at a bulletin board, though she wasn't really reading. One hand rested lightly against her hip. The other held a file pressed against her side. Her reflection was caught in the glass opposite her, a precise mirror of composure. Mercer hesitated. He could have turned around. The hallway branched to the stairwell just behind him. But something, duty, guilt, inertia, kept him there. She turned slightly, enough to sense him before seeing him. The air changed. Their eyes met across the polished distance. No words, no gesture. Just recognition. The shared understanding of two people bound by an event that neither could undo nor fully name. Mercer took a step forward. The sound of his shoes against the tile echoed too loudly. Each step measured against memory. The closer he moved, the smaller the space seemed to grow, until the corridor became not architecture, but sentence. One long, narrowing line toward accountability. When he stopped, there was still a few feet between them. Enough for silence to breathe. Chief Holt didn't move. Her gaze stayed level, her face composed. The file in her hand didn't shift. Mercer's voice rose in his throat but never reached air. He had imagined this moment a dozen times, the words ready, lined up. I'm sorry. Simple, human. But now they felt like contraband in this place of rules and titles. He tried again, internally. The sentence formed cleanly in his mind, almost prayer-like. I'm sorry for what I did, for what it meant, for what it revealed, but her silence stopped it. It wasn't cold nor merciful. It was exact. Her restraint had weight, not the absence of response, but the presence of decision. She had chosen silence because words would reduce the moment to something procedural, something survivable. Mercer lowered his eyes. Between them, the corridor lights flickered once, briefly catching both of their reflections in the same pane of glass. For an instant they appeared side by side, two figures equalized by transparency, neither superior nor inferior, both contained within the same institutional reflection. Then the light steadied, and the image split again. He looked up. She was still watching him, not with accusation, but with clarity, the kind that leaves no room for misunderstanding. "Chief," he managed finally. His voice low, almost inaudible. She gave a small nod. Acknowledgement, not forgiveness. Then she turned slightly toward her office door, which stood half open. The space beyond was dark, a thin band of shadow dividing the light of the corridor. She stepped toward it, paused in the doorway. For a second it seemed she might speak. But instead, she placed the file on the corner of a table inside, then closed the door halfway, not fully, not decisively, just enough to mark distance. Mercer remained where he was. The hum of the air conditioning filled the silence between them. Mechanical and indifferent, he looked again at the glass wall. Her reflection had vanished. Only his remained now. Solitary, slightly distorted by the light's angle. He thought of the old training sessions, the ones that taught officers how to command presence. Stand tall. Project control. Never show hesitation. The posture had been drilled into him until it became reflex. But now it felt like armor that no longer fit. He exhaled, a quiet, uneven sound that seemed too human for the corridor's geometry. Behind him, footsteps approached, two junior officers carrying stacks of files. They slowed when they saw him, then passed quickly, whispering something he couldn't hear. The echo of their movement faded down the hall, leaving the same static quiet. He looked again toward Holt's office. The door remained half open, a narrow seam of darkness. He thought of how silence worked inside institutions. It could mean caution, or complicity, or grace. In her hands, it was none of those. It was discipline, deliberate, surgical, necessary. He found himself admiring that precision, even as it dismantled him. For a long time he stood without moving. His thoughts turned over themselves, small, exact circles of regret. He wanted to tell her he understood now, that authority meant responsibility, not immunity. The control meant nothing without conscience. But he knew such words would sound like excuses, and silence, for once, seemed the more truthful language. When he finally turned to leave, his reflection followed a half step behind, lagging in the glass like an echo that refused to synchronize. As he reached the corner, he looked back one last time. The door to Holt's office was still ajar, the thin line of darkness unchanging. The corridor lights reflected faintly against the glass wall, tracing a ghostly outline of where they had stood. Two figures, two silences, one institution holding its breath. He walked on. Outside, sunlight filtered through the atrium, pooling in rectangles on the floor. The day was clear, the air crisp, indifferent to the moral weather inside. In the reflection of the glass doors as they slid open, he caught sight of himself again. The badge on his chest caught the light, briefly too bright to look at. Then the sun shifted and it dulled. He stepped out into the city. The door closed behind him with a soft hydraulic sigh, a sound that felt like both ending and continuance. Inside, Chief Holt stood alone in her office. She looked once toward the door, then turned to her desk. The reflection of her face appeared faintly in the darkened computer screen. She regarded it for a moment, expressionless, then pressed the power button. The screen went black. Silence filled the room again, but this time it wasn't emptiness. It was order. The city woke to screens. Every lobby, every diner, every office corner had one. Flat, glossy rectangles streaming the same rotation of faces and headlines. Anchors in dark suits spoke with urgency crafted to sound impartial. Behind them, the same image played in silent repetition, a still frame of a woman stepping into a press briefing. Her expression calm, the caption beneath reading, "A New Era of Accountability, Chief Amara Holt." The story had become national now. The clip of the courthouse chaos had been edited. Condensed, repackaged into palatable outrage, enough to fuel debate, but not reflection. Each network adjusted its tone to match its audience. On one, Holt was the embodiment of reform. On another, a political appointment meant to soothe public anger. Every panel used the same language of renewal and irony, cycling through words like symbol, healing, change. No one mentioned what silence had cost her. Inside the department's media room, rows of small televisions lined the walls. The sound was muted, but captions flickered in real time. The city's first black woman police chief. A department in transition. A controversial past incident. The last phrase lingered longest, as if the system itself refused to name its wound. Mercer sat in the corner, unacknowledged. His face appeared on one of the smaller screens, frozen mid-motion, a frame from the viral clip that had circulated weeks earlier. He had long since stopped trying to avoid it. There it was again, his expression half hidden, his posture too rigid, the uniform too crisp. To the public, that still image was him, a symbol, a cautionary tale, a convenient villain. The irony, of course, was that no one truly cared who he was. They only needed what he represented. At the front of the room, the public information officer, a man named Leighton, clicked through slides preparing for the afternoon's press conference. Each word had been measured, polished, and neutralized. The department continues to review the internal findings. The chief remains committed to transparency and reform. Officer Mercer is currently cooperating with internal processes. Every line was designed to close a door before a question could open it. Leighton adjusted his tie, glanced toward Mercer. "You'll stay out of sight until further notice." Mercer nodded. The instruction was unnecessary. He had become part of the furniture now, present but unseen. Outside cameras were already gathering in the plaza. Satellite vans, microphones, cables coiled like veins across the concrete. The building's reflective glass turned the media swarm into an endless duplication of itself. One crowd multiplied into dozens of identical images. At noon, Amara Holt stepped before the podium. The microphones leaned toward her like metal stems reaching for light. Her posture was exact, her words deliberate. "This department," she said, "exists to serve the public. That service requires trust. And trust requires accountability. Simple sentences, clear cadence, no emotion wasted." Behind her, Mercer watched through the feed on the wall-mounted monitors. Her voice came through the speakers in tones both familiar and distant. Not the voice of authority performing control, but of conscience asserting form. A reporter asked the question everyone had been waiting for. "Chief Holt, do you believe justice has been served in your own case?" The room in the broadcast froze for half a second, the kind of pause that carries its own gravity. Amara didn't blink.
This isn't about me, she said.
It's about a culture. One incident does not define an institution, but how an institution responds does. The sound technicians in the department's media room glanced at each other. The phrasing was careful, not defensive, not vengeful. It landed like a legal verdict spoken in plain language. Mercer looked at her image on the screen. The cameras made her seem distant, almost untouchable, but he could sense the precision of her restraint. She was doing what she had always done, transforming what was personal into something systemic, turning pain into policy. The broadcast cut to a panel of commentators. The tone shifted immediately. "She's walking a fine line between leadership and moral theater," one said. "Symbolically powerful, sure," another countered. "But will anything actually change?" "The irony here," added a third, "is that the officer in question now serves under her command." Laughter followed. Professional, practiced laughter. The conversation folded into itself, spinning until meaning thinned into entertainment. In a diner across town, a group of customers watched from a booth. No one spoke. Someone poured more coffee. The screen above them looped back to the same image, Amara Holt's face beneath the words, "Reform in Uniform." Inside the station, Leighton turned off the televisions one by one. "Good optics," he murmured almost to himself. Exactly what the city needed. The silence that followed was not relief but vacuum. Mercer stayed seated even after the others left. The screens were black now, but their reflections lingered faintly. The ghost of images burned into the glass. He stared at the place where Holt's face had been, and for a moment he thought he saw movement. A flicker of light like the residual afterimage of a flashbulb. He wondered what it meant to be a symbol. Whether it was power or imprisonment, whether Holt had chosen it, or if the system had sculpted her into one. He thought of her silence in the hallway, how it had felt heavier than any verdict. Now the world had given that silence a microphone, and in doing so, diluted it. The headlines would fade soon enough. Another crisis would replace this one. But the image, that still frame of both of them, would remain archived in the city's digital memory, called up whenever the story of reform required a visual reference. He stood slowly, the chair legs scraping against the tile. The sound seemed to echo far too long. Outside, the plaza was still filled with reporters packing up equipment, their reflections moving like fragments in the mirrored glass. He watched them for a while, then turned toward the elevators. The doors slid open with a muted chime. Inside, the metallic walls reflected his figure again, fragmented by light, stretched by angle. He looked at himself as the doors closed, cutting his image in half. The city above continued talking, typing, broadcasting. Words without weight, images without context. Somewhere in that noise, truth was still present, not erased, just buried under commentary. But it was there, waiting for silence to uncover it again. The ballroom glowed in gold and glass, light from the chandeliers scattered across polished floors, catching on sequined gowns and polished shoes. The air was thick with polite laughter and the faint hum of an overworked air conditioning unit, fighting to cool a room overheated with self-congratulation. The event had been billed as the City Gala for Progress. Banners along the walls displayed phrases like community partnership and building trust through change. Beneath them, waiters in black vests moved with silent efficiency, balancing trays of champagne that glimmered under the light. Amara Holt stood near the back of the room, expression measured, posture perfect. Her dark suit looked almost austere against the shimmer around her. The crowd shifted subtly to make space wherever she stood, not out of deference but uncertainty, the kind of distance given to someone whose presence means more than their comfort. At the podium, the mayor was speaking. "A department transformed," he said, his voice carrying through the speakers with polished conviction. "A department that reflects the values of this great city. Diversity, accountability, progress." Applause followed. Choreographed and hollow, Mercer stood by the entrance. He wore his uniform, the collar too tight under the bright lights. A name badge, hastily pinned, hung slightly crooked on his chest. The assignment had been presented as a show of trust, internal phrasing for controlled visibility. He wasn't there as a guest. He was there to be seen, silently, proof that the department was still a family. He scanned the room mechanically, the way he'd been trained, but his gaze always drifted back to the podium, to the rows of officials smiling at nothing, to the woman standing quietly behind them, Amara Holt. She didn't smile. She didn't clap. Her stillness absorbed the movement around her, turning it all into performance. A photographer's flash went off, sharp, white, momentary. Mercer blinked against the afterimage. When his vision cleared, Amara was shaking the mayor's hand, the cameras catching the gesture from every angle. The crowd erupted again in applause. He knew what the photo would look like before he saw it. The mayor's grin, her calm restraint, the caption, "A Night of Reform." The band began to play, soft jazz that folded neatly into the background noise. Waiters refreshed glasses. Conversations rose and fell like rehearsed dialogue. Mercer moved closer to the perimeter of the room, partly to escape the brightness, partly to watch. He caught fragments of conversation. Finally turning a corner. "Historic appointment. Optics couldn't be better." Each sentence was wrapped in the language of progress but carried the texture of relief. The relief of people who believed that by celebrating reform, they no longer needed to enact it. From his post, he could see Amara seated now at the head table. The mayor leaned toward her, saying something with the practiced charm of a politician who mistakes performance for connection. She nodded politely, eyes fixed on her untouched glass of water. The camera flashes continued, a mechanical pulse marking the rhythm of the evening. When the dinner was served, Mercer stepped back into the shadows near the hallway. He wasn't hungry. The scent of roasted meat and wine drifted across the room, sharp and layered. He adjusted his badge, still crooked, but didn't fix it. Somehow it felt accurate. An older officer approached him, one of the veterans from his precinct. "Tough duty, huh?" he said quietly, holding a glass of champagne he wasn't supposed to have. Mercer gave a small nod. Just another shift, the man smirked. Guess we're all part of the show now. Then he moved back toward the crowd, his laughter swallowed by the band. Mercer looked again toward the head table. The mayor was still speaking, introducing donors, thanking community partners. The applause sounded identical every time, brief, perfunctory, obligatory. Then came the toast. To our city's future, the mayor declared, lifting his glass high, and to the leadership that will carry us there. Every glass in the room rose. The sound of crystal colliding filled the air like polite thunder. Amara lifted hers slowly. The light caught the rim, a thin ring of brightness against her composed face. She didn't drink. The room didn't notice. It was too busy congratulating itself. Across the ballroom, Mercer watched. The cameras flashed again, recording the illusion. The chief smiling faintly, the mayor radiant. The donors glowing in the artificial light. He wondered if anyone else saw the distance between gesture and truth. As the music resumed, Amara stood. The movement drew a few glances, then the crowd politely refocused on itself. She stepped away from the table, excused herself from the mayor with a professional nod, and walked toward the exit. Mercer straightened unconsciously as she passed. She didn't look at him, but in her reflection on the glass doors, he saw her pause, just for a breath, as if recognizing his presence without acknowledging it. Then she stepped through and disappeared into the cooler, quieter corridor beyond. He remained by the entrance, watching the doors close behind her. Inside, the celebration continued, unbroken. The band played louder. Laughter rose higher. Flash after flash painted the room in brief bursts of white, freezing moments that looked like joy but felt like denial. On the far wall, a giant projection displayed the department's new slogan, "Trust Built Together." Mercer stared at it until the words blurred. He thought of the people outside these walls, the ones whose trust had never been asked for, only demanded. The city beyond the glass, still carrying the weight of what the institution tried to forget. A waiter passed him, offering a tray. Mercer declined. The waiter nodded, already moving on. In the mirrored surface of the doors, Mercer caught his own reflection again. The crooked badge, the expression that couldn't settle between guilt and duty. The sound of champagne glasses behind him blended with applause, a hollow rhythm that filled the space between conscience and ceremony. He exhaled slowly, the air catching in his throat. Somewhere down the corridor, he could still hear the faint echo of Amara's heels on tile, a measured rhythm fading into distance. For a moment he imagined following, saying something, anything. But then another round of applause erupted from the ballroom, drowning the thought. He remained at his post, the static figure in a room dedicated to motion. The cameras flashed again. The lights glittered. The speeches resumed, and the institution, dressed in its finest, continued to celebrate its own reflection. The room was windowless. A single overhead light hummed faintly, its fluorescence flattening everything it touched. The walls were gray, the table metal, the air too cold. A clock ticked in the corner, steady, indifferent, its rhythm synchronized to the exhaustion in Mercer's chest. He sat across from two members of internal affairs. Neither smiled, neither frowned. They were functionaries, their expressions standardized. A monitor sat between them, black for now, waiting. "Officer Mercer," the senior investigator said, not looking at him. "We'll review the evidence once more for completeness." Mercer nodded. His throat was dry. The investigator pressed a key. The monitor came alive, the familiar grain of security footage, the courthouse frame. No sound at first. Just the image, the crowded lobby, the blur of movement, the static flicker of fluorescent light. Mercer's stomach tightened. He'd seen it before, dozens of times, each viewing stripping it of context, turning it from an event into an artifact. But each time the silence before the sound still felt unbearable. Then the audio began. Muted chaos. Orders shouted. The clatter of movement. Then impact. He flinched. The sound, more than the image, was what haunted him. Brief, unmistakable recorded fact. The investigator didn't react. His eyes stayed on the screen, scanning the frames as though searching for meaning in pixels. "You acknowledge that's you?" "Yes." "And that the subject in question is Chief Holt, then a civilian?" "Yes." The video continued, replayed from another angle. Different perspective, Same act. Each playback was clinical. Start, stop, rewind, play. The repetition wore down, meaning itself. Mercer's hands rested flat on the table, motionless. In the reflection on the metal surface, he could see the screen's light tremble across his knuckles, a ghost of motion he no longer controlled. He tried to focus on the details, the badge on his chest, the polished floor, the distant figures frozen mid-turn. It was like watching a stranger move inside his own body, a man trained for order, losing it. He wanted to look away, but the institution didn't allow that. The review process was ritual, confession through documentation. After the fifth replay, the junior investigator spoke. "You've stated previously that your intent was compliance control. Do you maintain that position?" Mercer hesitated. The words felt mechanical in his mouth. "Yes, I was following protocol." The man nodded, typing. The keyboard clicks echoed like distant footsteps. The senior investigator folded his hands. "And in retrospect?" Mercer looked up, confused. "Sir? Do you believe your use of force was justified?" Silence. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The screen still glowed in front of him, paused on the frozen image. Himself mid-motion, face tense, the moment stretched into permanence. He could no longer tell what he was looking at. A crime? A mistake? A reflection of something the system had taught him to become? His own voice sounded far away. "No," the investigator didn't respond. He made a note on the file. The sound of the pen scratching paper was almost tender in its precision. Mercer's eyes drifted to the edge of the table, where a single folder lay half open. Inside were printed transcripts, reports, and summaries, all versions of him, flattened into language. Officer acted with excessive force. Officer expressed regret. Officer remains under review. A life translated into procedure. The monitor replayed once more, unprompted, the investigator running through timestamps. The video looped again and again, the mechanical rhythm of the act turning into abstraction. Mercer watched until the image stopped meaning anything. The sound no longer registered as impact, only static. He felt detached, as if the man on the screen were someone else entirely, someone who had borrowed his face and forgotten to give it back. "Officer Mercer," the senior investigator said again. "You'll be notified once findings are finalized." The statement was empty of promise. Mercer nodded. They closed the folder slowly, the sound amplified by the room's acoustics. A deliberate, final sound. The investigator slid it into a stack with others, indistinguishable now from 100 different cases. A pause followed, the kind that belongs more to paperwork than people. "You may go." Mercer stood. His legs felt unsteady, though his face remained composed. He turned toward the door. The metal handle was cold against his palm. Before he left, he glanced back once. The monitor was still glowing, paused on that same frame, his figure frozen mid-motion, caught forever between command and collapse. The investigators had already moved on, shuffling new files, speaking in low bureaucratic tones. The system was still running, indifferent to the ruin it processed. He stepped out into the hallway. The fluorescent hum followed him there too. The corridor stretched long and empty, every door identical, every sound sterile. For a moment he stopped and leaned against the wall. The world felt distant, unreal, as if he were still trapped inside the paused frame, unable to resume time. Somewhere down the hall, a copier started up, printing forms. Paper sliding against paper. Procedure continuing. Mercer straightened and began walking. His reflection followed in the glass panels, slightly delayed, as though uncertain whether to keep pace. By the time he reached the exit, he could still hear the echo of the playback in his mind, not as sound, but as rhythm. Start. Stop. Rewind. Play. It would never fade. He pressed his hand against the door and pushed it open. The corridor lights reflected briefly off the metal edge, bright and cold. Behind him, in the sealed room, the paused frame remained. His image still frozen on the monitor, not as memory, but as evidence, and the file folder, closed now, rested on the table like a verdict that didn't need to be spoken. The building was nearly empty. It was long past midnight, the corridors hollowed of sound. Only the hum of the vending machine in the break area disturbed the stillness, a low, mechanical drone that blended with the faint ticking of the emergency exit sign. Mercer walked slowly down the hallway, his reflection pacing beside him in the darkened glass. His uniform jacket was unbuttoned, his tie loosened. He had not planned to be here. He had told himself hours earlier that he wouldn't come back, but restlessness had pulled him through the station doors and up the silent stairwell. Chief Holt's office light was still on. A single desk lamp, visible through the frosted glass window, cast a long yellow beam across the floor. It cut through the surrounding darkness like a narrow corridor of its own. Order imposed upon shadow. He hesitated outside her door, then knocked once. A pause. "Come in." Her voice calm even. He stepped inside. The office was minimalist. Nothing unnecessary, nothing sentimental. The desk bare except for a single stack of reports and a cup of coffee gone cold. The faint scent of paper and dust. Amara sat behind the desk, still in uniform, posture unbent by fatigue. The lamplight carved a soft outline around her shoulders, her face half in shadow. "Officer Mercer." He nodded. "Chief." The word caught in his throat. He closed the door behind him, the click echoing louder than he expected. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was not awkward. It was deliberate, like everything else in the room. Mercer cleared his throat. "I saw the review report. She didn't look up from the papers. And it's still open." "Yes," he shifted his weight. "It's been months. Justice," she said. Moves slower than guilt. He flinched slightly, unsure if she meant it for him or for the system they both served. The clock on her wall ticked softly, steady and precise. He listened to it as though it were keeping time for his confession. "I came here because—" He stopped. "Because I don't understand." She finally looked at him. Her gaze was measured, assessing, but not unkind. "What don't you understand?" "You haven't done anything." His voice cracked slightly. "You could have ended my career. You could have made an example of me. But you haven't. You haven't said a word about it. Not to me, not to anyone." "Why?" Her silence lingered long enough to make him regret asking. Then softly, "You think punishment is what this is about?" "I don't know what else it could be." She leaned back slightly in her chair. The desk lamp threw her shadow across the wall, tall, still, almost detached from her body. "Tell me, Officer Mercer," she said, "what would punishment give you?" He frowned. "Accountability. For you? For the department. For everything." Her eyes stayed on him. "You want closure. You want to believe there's an ending that makes this right." He exhaled, frustrated. "Wouldn't you?" "No." The word landed like a stone in water, small but final. He looked at her, searching for anger, for emotion, for something human enough to match his own disarray. But she remained composed. "Then what do you want?" he asked. "I want the institution to look at itself," she said. "Not at you, not at me. At itself." He blinked, unsure how to respond. Her voice stayed calm, almost gentle. "You keep waiting for me to forgive you, or condemn you, but that would make it personal." And this was never personal. His mouth opened slightly. "I assaulted you." "Yes. And you're saying it's not personal?" "I'm saying it's systemic." The hum of the vending machine outside filled the brief silence that followed. Mercer looked down at his hands. They were trembling slightly. "I don't know what that means anymore." "It means," she said, "that if I make it about you, the system gets to survive unchanged. It gets to tell itself the problem was one man, one act, one moment. And then it moves on." He felt the words hit like impact, invisible but absolute. She continued softly, "But if I make it about the institution, it can't hide behind you. That's why I haven't punished you, and that's why I haven't forgiven you." Her eyes didn't waver. "Because it's not about you." For a long time, there was no sound except the faint hum of electricity in the walls. Mercer sat down slowly in the chair opposite her, unable to stand. The air felt heavier, the lamplight sharper. He looked at her untouched coffee, a thin film forming on the surface. The smell had turned bitter with time. He thought about everything that had followed. The footage, the hearings, the media, the hollow celebration. He had told himself that he was the center of it all, the fallen man, the story's hinge. But sitting here under that light, he realized he was just one component in a machine built long before him. "I thought," his voice faltered, "I thought if I could apologize it might mean something." "It might," she said, To you, but not to the structure that made it possible. He looked up. Her expression was calm, resolute. Not cruel, truthful. What happens now? He asked quietly. Now, she said, you live with it. That's the work you owe. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of verdict. He nodded slowly, a motion halfway between understanding and surrender. The silence stretched again, long enough for the ticking clock to become unbearable. Then Amara reached forward and switched off the lamp. The room fell into near darkness, lit only by the faint red glow of the exit sign in the hallway. Her face was barely visible now, only outline. Shadow presence. Go home, Officer Mercer. He stood, his body heavy, movements deliberate. At the door he paused, one hand on the handle. He wanted to say something, gratitude, remorse, anything, but the words seemed small against the scale of what hung between them. He opened the door. The vending machine hum grew louder, the fluorescent light from the corridor spilling across the threshold. He looked back once. She was still sitting in the darkness, motionless, a single figure holding the weight of an entire institution in her silence. He stepped into the hallway. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Outside, the night was cold. The streetlights hummed faintly, matching the tone that had followed him out of the building. He walked to his car without looking back. In the reflection of the windshield, he saw his own face, pale, hollow, unrecognizable. For the first time, he didn't see himself as the center of the story, just a man standing in the shadow of something larger. The chamber was built for appearances, a semicircle of desks, each lined with microphones, each microphone turned off. Behind them, the seal of the department, a polished bronze emblem catching the light like a halo designed by bureaucracy. Rows of folding chairs faced the front. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. The hearing room had been repurposed a dozen times, briefings, promotions, commendations, but today it hosted a ritual of self-cleansing. Mercer stood at the center, hands clasped behind his back. His uniform looked pressed but tired, the color leached from too many washes. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, steady and indifferent. To his left sat the disciplinary board, 5 officers, all in formal dress, their faces arranged in a careful neutrality. Before them lay folders, identical in color and thickness, the illusion of thoroughness. Chief Amara Holt occupied the chair set slightly apart, not among the board, not among the accused. Observer, silent authority. The proceedings began without ceremony. Captain Ruiz, chair of the board, cleared his throat. This session is now in order. A murmur of paper, pens clicking. A shuffling of postures. Ruiz's voice carried no inflection. Officer Daniel Mercer, you stand before the board regarding allegations of conduct unbecoming, dated 3 months prior. Do you understand the nature of these proceedings? Yes, sir. You have reviewed the report and accompanying evidence? Yes. And you are aware that this is a formal, recorded hearing? I am, Ruiz nodded once. The motions of justice began. The questions were procedural, impersonal. They moved through the language of policy, never of morality. Terms like incident, procedure, command decision replaced what had actually happened. Each phrase sanded the edges of violence until it fit neatly inside a file folder. A screen at the front of the room glowed with the first slide. A timestamp, a file number, a grainy still image. Mercer did not look. He had seen it too many times. Ruiz read from the file. According to witness statements, the officer's actions were in response to perceived disorder within the courtroom environment. His intent, as stated, was to restore order. The words "restore order" echoed briefly in the silence. The board members scribbled notes that would later be summarized into language no one would ever read. Closely, Mercer stood motionless. He could feel Amara's presence, not her gaze, but her steadiness, a kind of still gravity that anchored the room. One board member, Lieutenant Shaw, looked up from his notes. Officer Mercer, he said, in hindsight, do you believe your response was appropriate to the situation? The phrasing was surgical, designed to invite compliance, not truth. Mercer hesitated. His throat was dry. No, sir. Shaw nodded, writing something on his pad. Elaborate. He drew a breath. I acted in anger. I believed I was enforcing order, but I wasn't. He stopped himself, aware of the word forming. I was wrong, but he sensed the futility of it here. He finished instead with, It was a mistake. The word mistake sounded clean, acceptable. It sat comfortably in the air. Another officer, seated at the far end of the table, asked, "Do you believe your actions reflect upon the department?" Mercer almost laughed. The question was too careful, too narrow. But he forced his voice steady. "They reflect what the department allows." The air changed. Ruiz looked up. Pen stopped moving. Amara didn't react, but Mercer felt her silence sharpen. Ruiz spoke evenly. "You are advised to confine your responses to your own conduct." "Officer Mercer." "Yes, sir." A pause stretched. Long and thin, Ruiz resumed reading, voice returning to the safe cadence of documentation. "The board acknowledges that disciplinary review has been ongoing. Additional context has been requested from Internal Affairs and the City Legal Department. Until such materials are received, the board will withhold final recommendation." Decision deferred. Mercer nodded once, though the gesture meant nothing. The sound of the clock on the wall became noticeable again, a small, persistent pulse. The hearing moved into closing statements. Ruiz read from a prepared summary, a paragraph crafted by public relations, its sentences perfectly balanced between firmness and ambiguity. The department reaffirms its commitment to transparency, accountability, and procedural fairness. Officer Mercer remains on administrative reassignment pending final determination. This proceeding represents the department's ongoing effort to uphold the values of integrity and service. Every word was designed to be quoted, not felt. The microphones remained off. The only audience was the institution itself. When the session ended, Ruiz closed his folder and said, "Thank you, Officer Mercer." "You may step outside." Mercer turned. His boots echoed against the tile. The sound was too loud, too human. He walked past Amara on his way to the door. For a moment their eyes met. No recognition, no accusation. Just the shared knowledge of what this hearing truly was. An act of preservation, not justice. He stepped into the hallway. The door closed softly behind him, muffling the scrape of chairs and the low murmur of resumed conversation. The corridor was lined with framed photographs. Former chiefs, commendation ceremonies, smiling officers shaking hands with mayors long gone. The air smelled faintly of polish and age. Through the glass wall at the far end, he could see the city skyline. The lights flickered faintly, distorted by the evening rain. He leaned against the wall, eyes unfocused. Somewhere inside, a printer hummed. He could still hear the last line of the statement looping in his mind. The department reaffirms its commitment to transparency. He thought of the microphones, silent. The video replayed in closed rooms. The phrase "conduct unbecoming" that erased what words could not cleanse. After a while, the door opened again. Amara stepped out, papers in hand. She didn't stop. She walked past him without looking, but as she passed, her voice broke the quiet. "They'll take their time," she said evenly. "That's how systems survive." He nodded. She didn't wait for a response. Her footsteps faded down the hall, sharp and steady. Mercer stood alone beneath the emblem of the department etched into the glass wall. His reflection overlapped with it. Man and institution fused into one image, indistinguishable. Outside, the city lights pulsed against the rain-slicked streets, each reflection trembling but unbroken. The board would meet again, statements would be refined, and the machine would turn once more. Justice would wait. The seal above the hearing room gleamed faintly in the corridor's light. Its Latin motto unreadable from where he stood, but its meaning hung in the air. Endurance, not truth. The office where they took his badge was small and windowless, a single desk. 2 chairs. The air conditioning hummed overhead, too loud for the space. Everything about the room was intentional. Its sterility, its anonymity. No pictures, no flags, no comfort. Just walls the color of paper and the faint smell of metal polish. The captain conducting the procedure didn't look at Mercer when he entered. He was already seated behind the desk, posture perfect, expression unreadable. "Officer Mercer," he said, the words clipped. "You understand why you're here?" "Yes, sir." A form was pushed forward. Mercer glanced at it. Lines of print, empty fields for signature and date. He had filled out hundreds of similar forms in his career. Incident reports, statements, logs. They all looked the same. This one was different only in what it took from him. "Please surrender your department identification, badge and firearm." The captain's tone was clinical. detached, a man reciting the terms of a ritual he neither questioned nor felt. Mercer reached slowly for his belt. His hands didn't tremble, but they felt heavy, foreign. He removed the firearm first. The sound of the metal touching the desk was soft, almost polite. Then the badge. It slid from his fingers, the edges worn smooth from years of habit. When it landed, it made a sound sharper than he expected, a small, clean click that seemed to echo longer than it should have. He looked at it for a moment. The emblem gleamed under the fluorescent light, the city's seal, the word police etched beneath. For years it had meant authority, belonging, purpose. Now it looked like an artifact from another life. The captain picked it up with 2 fingers, as if it were fragile. He placed it gently into an envelope. "I'm required to inform you," he said, "that this is a non-punitive administrative suspension pending final determination. You are not to represent yourself as an officer or carry any departmental insignia until further notice." The script was memorized, drained of emotion. Mercer could almost hear the spaces where feeling used to live in those words. He nodded. "Understood." The captain didn't reply. He reached for a pen, wrote something brief on the form, and signed it. The scratch of ink against paper filled the silence. Mercer stood still. "There was nothing left to say. Is that all?" "That's all," the captain said without looking up. Mercer turned toward the door. As he reached for the handle, the captain added, "You'll be contacted once the board reconvenes." Mercer paused. "If it ever does." The captain didn't answer. He stepped into the hallway. The noise of the station, phones, footsteps, muted conversation, washed over him in a single indistinct blur. For years those sounds had been the rhythm of his life. Now they felt distant, like echoes from another floor. He walked down the corridor slowly. Not to delay leaving, but to absorb the weight of it, the closing of a space he had once thought permanent. Officers moved aside as he passed. Some nodded, brief and uncomfortable. Others avoided his gaze. Conversations dipped and resumed behind him. When he reached the main lobby, the light changed. The ceiling here was higher, the air colder. Glass walls faced the street, bright with morning glare. The city beyond looked pale, washed out. He stopped for a moment at the security gate. The same gate he had passed through thousands of times, the scanner's beep once a sound of belonging. Now, as he approached, the guard on duty looked uncertain. A silent nod passed between them. Mercer walked through. No beep, no light, just absence. From the mezzanine above, Amara Holt stood behind the glass railing. Her hands rested lightly on the edge. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Her presence filled the space more completely than any words could. Mercer looked up once, saw her silhouette against the window. She wasn't looking at him. She was watching the lobby as a whole, the building itself. But he knew she saw him, for a brief moment. Time seemed suspended between them, the officer leaving, the chief remaining, each defined by the same silence. He turned and continued toward the exit. The doors opened automatically. The rush of outside air hit his face, colder than he expected, tinged with exhaust and the faint metallic smell of rain. He stepped out onto the concrete. The doors slid shut behind him with a mechanical whisper. He stood for a moment on the steps, looking back through the glass. Inside, the fluorescent lights glowed flat and relentless. Officers moved through the lobby, purposeful, efficient. The machine of the department continued without pause. He realized then that his absence changed nothing. He had thought of this moment as an ending, but it was only subtraction, the system adjusting its shape around the vacancy he left. Inside, Amara turned away from the window. The reflection of the city skyline followed her across the glass, distorting slightly as she moved. She closed the blinds, dimming the lobby below. In her office, the envelope containing Mercer's badge lay on her desk, awaiting transfer to records. She didn't touch it. The object was too small to hold what it represented. Downstairs, Mercer descended the concrete steps slowly, his footsteps hollow. Each step was a measure of time, of consequence, of quiet recognition. At the bottom, he stopped. The city noise rose around him. Traffic, voices, distant sirens. The sounds of the same order he once enforced. He reached into his pocket out of habit, fingertips brushing the space where his badge used to be. Nothing, only fabric. For the first time in years, he felt entirely civilian, unarmed, unshielded. He looked up at the department's facade. The glass gleamed under the pale sky, each panel reflecting fragments of the street below. In one reflection, he saw himself, small, diminished, free perhaps in a way that frightened him. He turned and walked into the crowd. The city absorbed him easily, the way it absorbs everything. Behind him, the building stood unchanged, its lights steady, its walls silent. Inside, a single envelope waited on a desk. The sound of metal sliding across it earlier in the day seemed to linger, faint but persistent. The sound of belonging reduced to evidence. The conference room on the 12th floor smelled of coffee and compromise. The long table gleamed under recessed lighting, its polished surface reflecting the thin stack of policy drafts laid neatly at its center. The blinds were half drawn, slicing the morning sun into narrow, precise beams that fell across the room like bars of light. Amara Holt sat at the head of the table, posture composed, hands folded over a folder labeled Community Relations Reform, Draft 2. Around her, the mayor and several senior officials murmured over printouts. Their voices were low, professional, practiced in the tone of cautious agreement. Mayor Reddick, a man whose confidence came from cameras more than conviction, leaned back in his chair. "We need visible progress, Chief. Something the press can point to." "Visibility," Amara said evenly, "is not the same as progress." He smiled, the kind of smile meant to deflect rather than respond. "Optics matter. People need to believe things are changing." She regarded him quietly. "Belief without structure is decoration." Across the table, one of the deputy commissioners cleared his throat. "Perhaps we can frame the revisions as a pilot initiative. Roll out training modules first. Adjust optics later." The language was bureaucratic camouflage, words that softened accountability until it fit within the budget. Amara opened the folder. The paper inside rustled like dry leaves. "Policy without consequence isn't reform," she said. "It's choreography." The mayor's smile faded slightly. "You have to understand the politics of this, Chief. The unions are already uneasy. If we move too fast, they've moved too slowly for decades." The room fell silent. Her tone was measured, but it carried the weight of finality. She wasn't angry. She was exact. Outside, the city shimmered under weak sunlight. Traffic crawled below, horns blending into a dull hum. From this height, it looked orderly, almost peaceful. Inside the room, the machinery of governance churned, not visible, but constant. Reddick exhaled, adjusting his cufflinks. "I'll review your draft," he said at last. "But we'll need to soften the language before it goes public." Amara nodded once. "Of course." She gathered the papers, slid them neatly back into the folder. Her movements were deliberate, the small choreography of control. The meeting adjourned with polite handshakes and quiet departures. One by one, the men filed out, leaving behind the faint smell of cologne and bureaucracy. When the room was empty, Amara remained seated. The silence was thick, heavy with the residue of conversation. She looked at the folder before her, the proposals inside. The careful phrasing designed to survive scrutiny. A reflection of herself appeared faintly in the polished table, sharp uniform lines blurred by the gloss. She reached for her coffee, now cold, and drank anyway. Through the window, she watched the city below. Sirens wailed in the distance. Somewhere, the same structures she fought against continued, unshaken. But the work had begun, slow, precise, irreversible. She stood, gathering the folder under her arm, and left the room. Across the city, the bar was dim and nearly empty. Mercer sat at the far end, a half-finished glass before him. The television above the counter played a muted news segment, footage of the mayor shaking hands with Chief Holt. Headlines scrolling beneath. Department announces reform initiative. The sound was off, but the images were enough. The same room, the same faces. He could imagine the words. He stared into the glass. The ice had melted, thinning the drink into something almost flavorless. Outside the bar window, the streetlights reflected off wet pavement, stretching into thin ribbons of gold. Rain tapped softly against the glass, rhythmic, indifferent. A couple of patrons murmured near the door, their conversation low and indistinct. The bartender wiped the counter, glanced at Mercer, said nothing. He hadn't shaved in days. His jacket hung loose on his frame. The world around him had resumed its rhythm. He was the one still out of step, He turned his head slightly to the side. On the wall near the entrance hung a framed photo, a police parade, rows of uniforms gleaming in sunlight. He found his younger face somewhere near the center, smiling without knowing why. He looked away. His apartment later was quiet, the air stale from neglect. He switched on the lamp beside his bed, a weak yellow glow spilling across the dresser. There, in the layer of dust, was a faint outline where his badge once rested. He hadn't cleaned it away. The shape was still perfect, a ghost of belonging. He sat on the edge of the bed. The city's sounds filtered faintly through the thin walls, cars, voices, the occasional siren. Familiar, but distant. He thought of Holt, of her stillness in that hearing room, of her voice cutting through layers of language and denial. "It's not about you." The words lingered, reshaping themselves into something heavier. He realized then that he had been waiting, for punishment, for closure, for a return. But the world had already moved on. His waiting meant nothing to it. On his nightstand lay a folded piece of paper, the official notice of suspension. Beneath it, an unopened envelope from the department's pension office. He didn't reach for either. He looked instead toward the window. The rain had stopped. Streetlights shimmered in the puddles below, glowing like tiny, unreachable suns. He exhaled slowly. The silence of the apartment felt complete, unbroken. Yet beneath it, something faint persisted, not redemption, but the awareness that change, once begun, could not be reversed. Somewhere downtown, Chief Holt was still in her office, the same folder open under the same relentless light. She would be drafting memos, issuing directives, building something that might outlast them both. Mercer imagined her there, the quiet persistence, the precision of her discipline. And for the first time, he didn't feel resentment, only recognition. He rose, walked to the dresser, and ran a finger along the badge-shaped outline in the dust. The gesture left a mark, a single clean streak through the gray. He stood for a moment, staring at it, then turned off the lamp. The room fell into darkness. Outside, the city lights blinked in unison, as if the world itself were taking a slow, deliberate breath. The knock was soft but certain. Mercer hesitated before answering. The afternoon light filtering through the blinds fell in narrow, pale stripes across the floor, dividing the small living room into alternating bands of brightness and shadow. Dust hung motionless in the air, suspended mid-flight. He opened the door halfway. Amara Holt stood on the threshold. Plain suit, no uniform. Her presence filled the space between them more completely than the light. "Chief," he said automatically, though the title no longer applied to him. "Daniel." Her tone was level, neither cold nor kind, factual, as if this visit were part of an unspoken duty. He stepped aside. "Come in," she entered. The room was small, sparely furnished, a couch, a coffee table with a few unopened envelopes, a muted television reflecting faint color across the wall. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee and dust. Amara took in the room without judgment. She remained standing, hands clasped loosely in front of her. Mercer gestured to the chair opposite the couch. "Would you like to sit?" "No." Her refusal was gentle but final. He nodded and sat down himself. The posture difference, her upright, him seated, gave the moment its quiet imbalance. For a while, neither spoke. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, then faded. Finally, she said, "I came because you deserve to hear it in person." He looked up. "Hear what?" "The department will not be reinstating you." The words landed with the precision of a verdict. No build-up, no cushion. Just truth delivered cleanly. Mercer nodded slowly. "I thought as much. You'll receive formal notice within the week. Benefits will remain, but your position is closed." He rubbed his hands together, palms dry against each other. "Was it your decision?" "Yes." He didn't look surprised. "Thank you for telling me yourself." Amara inclined her head slightly. "You earned that much." A silence settled between them, not awkward, but grave. The kind of silence that acknowledged everything that had come before without needing to name it. Mercer leaned back slightly, his shoulders sinking into the worn couch. "I've been waiting," he said. "Not sure for what. Maybe I thought someone would call, or that something might change." She nodded once. "Things change, just not the way we expect." He smiled faintly, a gesture without humor. "No, they don't." Sunlight shifted across the room, the stripes of light on the floor slowly migrating up the wall. Amara's gaze followed it for a moment, then returned to him. "How have you been?" The question was ordinary, but her voice carried weight. Not pity, not formality. Simply care refracted through restraint. Mercer considered his answer. "Quiet," he said finally. "Too quiet." She said nothing. He glanced toward the blinds. "I watch the city sometimes. From the window. Feels like it's learning to live without me." Amara's eyes softened, just slightly. "The city learns to live without all of us." He exhaled through his nose, nodding. "I suppose that's true." He looked back at her, studied her face. The stillness of it, the calm that once unsettled him now felt almost merciful. "Do you think I deserve it?" he asked. Her response came without hesitation. "Deserve has nothing to do with it. Systems aren't moral. They're structural. And people choose what they do inside them." He absorbed that. The room seemed smaller now, the air heavier. "Would you have forgiven me?" he said quietly. "If it were your choice alone." Amara's eyes did not waver. "I don't deal in forgiveness," he nodded. "I didn't think so." There was no resentment in his voice, only a tired understanding. Amara moved closer to the doorway, as though preparing to leave. The light caught her shoulder, outlining her in pale gold. "I meant what I said the night you came to my office," she said. "This was never about you." "I know," he said. "I didn't then. I do now." The words were soft but final, like a gate closing. For the first time, Amara allowed herself a long breath, her posture easing slightly. She looked around the room again. The dust on the television, the papers unopened, the faint trace on the dresser where a badge once rested. Every object carried silence like a second skin. She turned back to him. "You'll find work elsewhere." "I might. Then do it better." It wasn't command or comfort. It was the closest she would come to grace. Mercer nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than agreement. Amara turned toward the door. He rose to his feet, not to stop her, but to match her dignity. At the threshold she paused. The afternoon light framed her profile in white. "Chief," he said quietly. She looked back. "Thank you for coming." Her reply was simple. "Take care of yourself." Then she stepped out into the sunlight. He watched her walk down the narrow path toward the street. Posture steady, pace unhurried. When she disappeared around the corner, he closed the door slowly. The latch clicked into place, sharp in the quiet. He stood there for a moment, his hand still resting on the doorknob. The light through the blinds had shifted again, falling now across his face. He exhaled. No relief. No despair, just stillness. He walked to the window and looked out. The city moved as it always had. People crossing streets, cars halting at lights, the ordinary continuation of life. For the first time, he didn't feel separated from it, only smaller within it. He sat back down on the couch. The shadow lines from the blinds crossed his hands like a quiet signature. "I understand," he whispered. The words held no plea, no bitterness, only truth, clean and unadorned. The silence that followed was not empty. It was earned. Morning again. The station hummed the same as it always had. Fluorescent light buzzed above the corridors, steady and impersonal. The air smelled faintly of cleaning solvent and brewed coffee, the scent of bureaucracy renewing itself. Amara Holt walked through the glass atrium with her usual quiet precision. Her shoes struck the polished floor with measured rhythm. Officers passing nodded, some out of respect, others out of reflex. Nothing looked changed. Yet everything had shifted. A new code of conduct hung framed in the lobby, the department's public vow of reform. The words were exact, procedural, crafted for press conferences more than hearts. But beneath them, in the signatures, something trembled, a line of accountability that had never existed before. Her ID badge beeped against the scanner, the same small sound echoing through the empty morning. She paused a second too long before walking on. Upstairs, the command offices were quiet. A television in the corner replayed local news without volume. The closed captions ran like scripture. "Department continues reform under Chief Holt." She turned off the screen. The silence that replaced it felt almost sacred. She stood by the window for a moment, watching the city below, blocks of motion, Traffic lights blinking through pale sunlight. People crossing intersections in precise choreography. The machinery of civic life. Cold, continuous, endlessly self-correcting. It was the same city that had watched her fall, then rise. The same system, only retuned. She thought of Mercer, not as a wound but as an artifact. The echo of what the system once demanded to survive. She hadn't seen him since the visit. No one had. His name had drifted out of the precinct's language, erased by administrative efficiency. In files, he was now just a date of termination, and yet, when she passed certain hallways, she could still feel the air tighten, the trace memory of that old culture, the quiet bias that wore a badge of civility. Reform could change procedure. It could not rewrite conscience. She returned to her desk. On it lay a stack of policy drafts awaiting signature. She signed each with slow precision. Every line mattered. Each small reform, body camera audits, community oversight, revised use of force clauses, felt like chiseling marble with a pin. Yet she signed. Every change was both too small and necessary. A knock sounded at her door. "Chief?" It was Lieutenant Ramos, young, alert, voice tentative. "The mayor's office confirmed your address for the community forum next week." "Thank you, Lieutenant." He hesitated before leaving. "Anything else you need?" No. When the door shut again, she allowed herself one breath, deep and even. Outside, the station moved in slow, mechanical rhythm. Phones ringing. Radios murmuring. The same instruments that once delivered chaos now played their steady, bureaucratic music. A patrol officer passed by, shoes clicking sharply, mirror polished, just like Mercer's had been. The sound lingered in her ear. Not everything could be reformed. Some things had to fade out with time. Personnel, attrition. She turned to the wall where a new plaque hung. Integrity, accountability, service. Words once hollow, now faintly credible. It was progress measured in decibels of silence. Across town, the city continued without pause. Streetlights blinked through the morning haze. Buses hissed to a stop, releasing passengers who walked toward offices, schools, courts, the organs of the system pulsing on schedule. On a side street, Mercer walked unnoticed. No uniform, no badge, just another citizen moving through the city's indifferent rhythm. His posture was straighter now, not from pride, but from the slow discipline of humility. He carried a paper cup of coffee, hands bare against the cold. The city's noise folded around him. Sirens, horns, footsteps, a chorus of the life he once policed. He passed a police cruiser idling by the curb. For a moment, he looked at it. Not with resentment, not with nostalgia, just recognition. The young officer inside glanced at him briefly, unaware of who he was. The moment passed. The cruiser pulled away. Mercer kept walking. He worked nights now at a security firm downtown. Small job, no authority, but steady. Sometimes, in the quiet hours, he caught his reflection in the lobby's glass doors and barely recognized the man looking back, not because he had changed, but because he had finally seen himself as the world saw him. He didn't seek forgiveness. He didn't speak about the past. But in the mornings, when light hit the glass buildings just so, he felt something close to peace. Back in the station, Amara chaired a meeting. The long table gleamed under the recessed lights. Paper agendas lay neatly aligned, the projector cutting a white beam across faces. Her voice was calm, even, deliberate. Accountability isn't optional. It's culture. It must outlast us. Some nodded. Some wrote notes. Others avoided her gaze. She knew change would not come through speeches but through fatigue, the slow wearing down of old reflexes. The department was a living organism, and reform meant teaching it to breathe differently. At the end of the meeting, she looked across the table, at the faces, the uniforms, the mirrored badges. Every one of them reflected a piece of the institution. Every one of them carried the same potential for harm or honor. "Meeting adjourned," she said. The sound of chairs scraping against tile filled the silence, a mechanical chorus. When the room emptied, she remained seated for a moment, staring at the seal of the department etched into the far wall. The emblem had survived every scandal, every leadership change. Its permanence was both comfort and warning. She reached up and switched off the projector. The beam died, and the room dimmed. Night again. The station after hours was a cathedral of hums, the low drone of fluorescent lights, the distant tick of a wall clock. the echo of her own footsteps down the hall. In the lobby, a janitor polished the floor. The marble gleamed faintly, catching the light in sterile perfection. Amara paused near the entrance, looking out through the glass doors at the city beyond. Neon reflections rippling across wet pavement. Patrol cars gliding past like silent ghosts. The machinery continued. Always. But there was difference now. Not visible, not measurable, but real. A shift in tone, a recalibration. The system had absorbed the shock, adjusted, and carried on, but it had learned her name. She reached for her badge, clipped neatly at her belt. The small plastic rectangle caught the light. Once it had been a symbol of control. Now it was a test, of endurance, of restraint, of faith that institutions could be slowly, painfully reprogrammed from within. She pressed her badge against the exit scanner. It beeped once, the same sound Mercer had made hundreds of times before. The door unlocked with a clean mechanical click. She stepped outside. The night air carried the faint metallic scent of rain. The city hummed, its streets alive, its systems breathing. Somewhere, a radio crackled with static, a dispatcher's voice repeating codes, the grammar of authority continuing uninterrupted. Amara walked toward her car. Each footstep echoed against the pavement, deliberate, steady. Behind her, the building's lights stayed on. Always on. In the distance, beyond the courthouse dome, dawn's first light began to rise. Not pure, not redemptive, but persistent. The city did not forgive, did not forget. It endured. And within that endurance, somewhere between justice and its imitation, the system turned once more, humming the same familiar tune, just slightly out of key.